They always say, trust your instincts, but no one tells you what to do when your instincts scream at 3:27 a.m. That night, I was reviewing routine server logs for Innovate Solutions when something caught my eye, an access record from an IP address that didn't exist. Not on our registry, not in the sandbox, not even in any ghosted legacy zone. It was just there, like a footprint in wet cement where no one should have walked. I blinked twice, pulled up the trace, and reran the log filter. Same result. It wasn't a bug. It wasn't a fluke. It was someone, or something, inside our system, and they weren't supposed to be. At first, I told myself it was probably just a misconfigured test route or a forgotten legacy node. But my gut said no. This was deliberate. I cross-referenced timestamps, found matching anomalies in our container stacks, and even saw subtle outbound pings masked as system heartbeats. Someone had snuck in through a side door, and the door wasn't ours. It was Skyore X, a third-party module we had rushed into production just a week earlier. I remembered clearly how Dave, our head of engineering, had insisted on deploying it despite my request for a full security audit. "We don't have time, Bella," he said, waving it off like I was being dramatic. But now it was 3:40 a.m., and I was wide awake, staring at a silent breach growing roots inside our infrastructure. I started recording everything: screen captures, raw logs, hash traces. My hands shook not from fear, but from clarity. I knew exactly what I was looking at. This wasn't just a vulnerability. It was a threat, and I was alone with it. No one else saw it yet. No one else cared. Not until I said something. So, I opened a new file, titled it Ghost Access Report 1, and I started writing, line by line, timestamp by timestamp, proof layered over proof. I didn't know it then, but that one report would become the match that burned down everything. The job, the lies, the silence. All because at 3:27 a.m., something that shouldn't have existed tried to hide from me. But I saw it. I submitted the report before noon, attaching every log, every screenshot, every pattern I had mapped. I sent it directly to Dave, marked urgent, with a brief note. Potential breach origin traced to Skyore X. High risk. Please review ASAP. I expected shock, or at least urgency, but when he replied, it was with a shrug disguised as corporate language. Appreciate the thoroughness, Bella, but this feels more like a false positive. Let's not stir panic over hypothetical threats. Hypothetical. The word rang in my head like an insult. I had served this company for years, led audits through midnight weekends, patched holes left by reckless deployments, and now my warning was reduced to paranoia. Dave didn't even ask a follow-up. He just moved the email to his archive and kept pushing the Skyore integration to our external clients. I tried to keep calm, telling myself maybe he needed time, maybe he'd escalate. But by the end of the day, I knew he wouldn't. So I went to Matt, our CTO, thinking surely he would understand the weight of what I had uncovered. I forwarded the report again, added a second layer of analysis with real-time packet behavior, and highlighted the potential for lateral movement inside our architecture. 60 seconds after I hit send, Matt replied. A single line. Please follow the reporting protocol via your direct manager. That was it. No questions. No curiosity. Just a reminder that I had skipped the chain of command, even though the chain was rusted and willfully blind. I stared at the email like it had punched me. Not because it dismissed my findings, but because it confirmed something far worse. They didn't want to know. They didn't want to be accountable. And suddenly, I realized this wasn't just about security. It was about politics, about control. I hadn't just pointed to a flaw in the code. I had threatened their decision, their pride, their authority, and they were choosing silence. That night, I didn't sleep. I rewrote the report, not to make it clearer, but to make it undeniable. If they were going to ignore me, I would make it impossible for them to pretend they hadn't seen. I didn't know it yet, but the real danger wasn't the breach in the system. It was the breach of trust. The next morning, I walked into the office with a calm I didn't feel. I had already printed the revised report, marked every section in bold red, and included a technical appendix that broke down the exploit path to its rawest form. I placed it neatly on Matt's desk, then emailed the same package to our internal compliance team. No more hierarchy. No more waiting for someone to care. But by 11 a.m., I was summoned to a quick sync with HR and Dave. The room was too quiet, too rehearsed. Dave sat stiffly, barely looking at me, while the HR rep, whose name I barely knew, smiled the way someone smiles when they've been told to stay neutral. "Bella, we're concerned about some recent behavior," she began, with that slow, careful tone reserved for people they've already decided to get rid of. "There are processes in place for raising technical concerns. Bypassing management and alarming other departments creates unnecessary tension." My mouth went dry, not out of fear, but disbelief. They weren't just ignoring the breach. They were turning it into my mistake. I explained, calmly but firmly, that the timeline required urgency, that my manager had already dismissed the threat, that the evidence was overwhelming. Dave interrupted, voice clipped. "This isn't about the threat. It's about protocol. You went outside the chain. That's not how we operate here." I almost laughed. Not how we operate? They were talking like I had committed some ethical betrayal, while ignoring the actual threat burrowed inside our infrastructure. The HR rep slid a piece of paper across the table. "We'd like to issue a formal warning. This isn't disciplinary, just a record that protocol must be followed moving forward." I stared at it. A warning for refusing to let the company sleepwalk into disaster. I didn't sign it. I didn't take it. I simply stood up and walked out, back to my desk, and opened a fresh document. I began writing everything down, not just the technical logs, but the conversations, the responses, the silence. If they were going to build a case against me, I'd build one too. Because now, I understood the real breach wasn't in our firewalls. It was in their integrity. And I wasn't just fighting for the system anymore. I was fighting to be heard. By the end of that week, I noticed something strange. My access to certain internal tools had quietly disappeared. No announcement, no explanation, just a subtle lockout here and a revoked permission there. At first, I assumed it was an IT glitch, maybe fallout from the breach report, but when I asked the sysadmin about it, he froze. "I'm not supposed to discuss access changes," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact before walking away. That was the moment I knew. They were isolating me. Not officially, not in writing, but piece by piece, click by click, I was being erased. Meetings I had always attended disappeared from my calendar. My name was left off sprint reviews, and tasks I had owned for months were quietly reassigned. It wasn't just retaliation. It was a purge. But what they didn't realize was that I had already made copies of everything, every log, every email, every version of the Skyor X integration, and every trace it left behind. I wasn't hoarding secrets out of spite. I was documenting history. Because somewhere deep down, I had a sinking feeling they weren't just ignoring the breach. They were covering it up. That night, I sent the full report to an external cybersecurity contact I trusted. Someone with no ties to the company. Someone who knew what to do with this kind of threat. I didn't include my name. I didn't need to. The data spoke loud enough. A day later, news broke quietly in an obscure tech blog. An unnamed enterprise firm had been flagged for deploying third-party code with known backdoor vulnerabilities. No names were listed, but I knew it was us. And I knew someone in our leadership team had seen it too, because the next morning, I was locked out of my laptop completely. Not suspended, not fired, just locked out. No warning, no goodbye. I walked into the office, and my badge didn't work. I stood there for a moment under the cold glare of the reception lights and realized this was it. They weren't going to confront me. They were going to delete me. But what they didn't understand was that the story had already escaped. The silence they'd tried so hard to enforce had already cracked. And now, whether they liked it or not, the truth had started moving without me. I stood outside the office building for a full minute, holding my badge in my hand, staring at the red light that had just blinked me out of existence. No one came to greet me. No one offered an explanation. Just silence and a locked door. I turned away, walked to the nearest cafe, and sat down with my laptop, my personal one, the only device I still controlled. I connected to the secure drive where I had stored everything. The breach, the internal responses, the warnings I'd received, even the quiet access removals. It was all there, time-stamped and undeniable. And for the first time since 3:27 a.m., I wasn't scared. I was focused. I reached out to the cybersecurity contact again, this time with a message that wasn't anonymous. I told him everything. My name, my role, the exact sequence of events. He replied within the hour. "What you have isn't just a technical breach, Bella. It's a corporate liability." That was when I knew this wasn't just about proving I was right. This was about accountability. I prepared a full dossier and sent it to a journalist I trusted, someone who had spent years uncovering quiet disasters inside big tech. I told her I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth out where they couldn't bury it. The next day, the story dropped. Not a vague reference, not a rumor, an investigative piece with documents, screenshots, expert interviews. My name wasn't mentioned, but the company's was, and the fallout was immediate. Clients paused contracts. Shareholders demanded answers. Internally, panic spread faster than any virus in our codebase. I watched it unfold from my kitchen table, sipping coffee as executives scrambled to issue statements they hadn't prepared. The same people who dismissed me were now running damage control under headlines they couldn't spin. They had tried to erase me quietly, thinking I would fade. But instead, I became the one thing they couldn't silence: a witness. And though they had taken my badge, my login, my seat at the table, they couldn't take back the fact that I had seen the breach first. And now the world had seen it too. 2 days after the story broke, I received a letter. Not an email, not a phone call, but a thick, formal envelope delivered to my apartment door. Inside was a cease and desist, filled with legal jargon warning me against further disclosure of confidential proprietary information. I read it twice, calmly, then folded it and set it aside. It was a scare tactic, a paper wall meant to intimidate me into silence. But they were too late. The truth was already public. The article had sparked a storm. Industry forums were flooded with discussions. Cybersecurity experts began dissecting the Skyor integration, and former employees started sharing their own buried concerns. The silence they had counted on had turned into an avalanche. I didn't respond to the letter. Instead, I did something they never expected. I went public, on my own terms. I recorded a video, just me sitting at a plain desk. No filters, no dramatic lighting. I spoke clearly, factually, outlining everything I had witnessed. Not just the breach, but the culture of dismissal, the retaliation, the quiet lockout. I didn't accuse. I documented. And when I uploaded it, I thought maybe a few people in tech would care. But the video exploded. Within hours, it had hundreds of thousands of views. I was getting messages from engineers, journalists, even ethical hackers from across the world. Some offered jobs. Others shared their own stories of being silenced. It wasn't just my fight anymore. It was a collective memory of how often integrity gets buried under bureaucracy. By the end of the week, a government cybersecurity unit launched an inquiry into the company. Share prices dipped, 2 board members resigned, and the platform that once erased me now couldn't stop talking about me. Bella, the whistleblower. Bella, the one who warned them. They had underestimated the cost of silence. They thought they could control the narrative by cutting my access, by sliding a warning across a table, by locking a door. But they forgot that stories, once told, are immune to passwords. And now mine was everywhere. 3 weeks after the video went viral, I was sitting in a quiet co-working space when an unexpected email landed in my inbox. The subject line read, "Interested in building something that matters?" It was from a former CTO of a cybersecurity firm I had long admired, someone I had quoted in university papers, someone who understood that fixing broken systems required more than just patching code. He had seen the video, read the articles, followed the fallout. "What you did took more than skill," he wrote. "It took conviction. We need that kind of voice in the next thing we're building." I stared at the screen for a long time, not out of hesitation, but disbelief. For months, I had been treated like a liability. Now, suddenly, I was seen as an asset. We scheduled a call, then another, and within 2 weeks, I was invited to join a founding team of a new security startup. One built on transparency, user sovereignty, and above all, ethics that didn't bend when money was involved. This time, I wasn't just another engineer executing someone else's vision. I was shaping it. My experience wasn't just welcomed, it was foundational. I channeled everything, the breach, the dismissal, the silence, the viral storm, into architecture that couldn't be corrupted from the inside. Every tool we designed had auditability baked into it. Every process we created asked, what happens if someone raises a hand and says something's wrong? Because I had lived what happens when no one listens, and I wasn't going to let it happen again. Our startup gained traction fast, not just because the tech worked, but because people trusted the why behind it. Investors who once might have backed my former employer now backed us. Clients started requesting security frameworks that mirrored ours. And slowly, the industry began to shift. It was surreal watching the company that erased me try to rebuild its credibility, while the platform I helped create grew stronger by the day. They fired me hoping I'd disappear. Instead, they handed me the one thing I never expected, a story loud enough to build something better. And I wasn't just building software now. I was building proof that sometimes getting locked out is how you finally break in. 6 months into the startup, I found myself standing on a small stage at a tech ethics summit, looking out at a room full of engineers, founders, journalists, and regulators. The spotlight was warm, the mic slightly shaky in my hand, but my voice didn't waver. I told them everything, not just the technical details of the breach, not just the retaliation, but the human cost of being silenced. I spoke about how easily companies trade safety for speed, how whistleblowers are framed as threats instead of warnings, and how truth, when buried, always finds a way back to the surface. When I finished, the room was quiet, not with disinterest, but with something deeper: recognition. I could see it in their faces. Some had lived versions of my story. Others feared they might. Afterward, people approached me not for autographs or photos, but for conversations. Real ones. I met a developer who had been pushed out for flagging unethical data practices, a QA tester who was threatened after exposing manipulated metrics, a product manager who'd chosen silence and still regretted it. In those moments, I realized something profound. My story wasn't rare. It was just rarely told. Back at the office, we doubled down on what made our startup different. We released our first transparency dashboard to the public, allowing clients to audit every security event in real time. We open-sourced a portion of our codebase, inviting scrutiny instead of fearing it, and we launched an internal system called Pulse, where anyone, junior or senior, could anonymously flag concerns that went straight to leadership and external review. We didn't just preach ethics. We operationalized them, and word spread. We began attracting not just talent, but believers. People tired of compromising, of building beautiful tools for companies that buried their mistakes. We weren't the biggest name in the industry, not yet, but we were the loudest when it came to integrity. And every line of code, every feature we launched, carried the fingerprint of everything I had once been punished for. That red badge light, the one that shut me out, had become my origin point. They tried to erase me from their narrative, but instead they lit the first spark of mine. And now, every time our platform helped prevent a breach, I smiled quietly, knowing the silence they forced on me had become the noise they couldn't ignore. A year to the day after I was fired, I received an anonymous tip through our Pulse system. Short, direct, and chilling. Check out the new Skyor deployment. They're covering up again. I stared at the message, the name pulling me back like a cold wind through an open door. Skyor, the company that once erased my credentials and pretended I never existed. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to stay in the light I had fought so hard to build. But the other part, the part that remembered the 3:27 a.m. log, the locked door, the silence, knew I couldn't look away. I assigned a small, trusted team to quietly investigate. They found it within days. A familiar pattern of obfuscation, hidden vulnerabilities, delayed patches disguised as routine updates. Different project, same game. Only this time, the stakes were higher. Skyor had landed a massive public sector contract, one that involved sensitive citizen data. And they were deploying with known flaws. I sat in a meeting room with our legal counsel, our lead engineer, and a partner from the regulatory board who had supported our platform since day one. We laid everything out: evidence, patterns, risks. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about responsibility. We drafted a formal report and submitted it under our company name, backed by documentation and signatures. No more silence. No more back-channel warnings. When the investigation launched, Skyor denied everything at first, but the pressure was different this time. We had credibility now. We had allies. And most importantly, we had built our entire company around the very principle they had once ignored: transparency. The media caught on fast. Headlines swirled. Government contracts were paused pending review. And for the second time, the name they had tried to bury rose to the surface again. But this time, it wasn't just Bella, the fired engineer. It was Bella, co-founder of a company built on the ashes of silence. We didn't celebrate their fall. We didn't need to. Because the real win wasn't their downfall. It was the fact that someone, somewhere, trusted us enough to speak up. That was the world we were building. One where whistleblowers didn't have to stand alone. One where truth wasn't an act of rebellion, but the foundation of everything. The day the government officially terminated Skyor's contract, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt quiet, like something had come full circle, but not in the way stories usually end, with applause or revenge or some perfectly timed headline. No, this ending was quieter, heavier, more grounded. I watched the announcement on a muted screen in our office kitchen, while my team reviewed user feedback from our latest release. There were no cheers, no champagne, just the sound of fingers tapping keyboards and someone heating leftover noodles in the microwave. And yet, in that moment, I realized something I hadn't seen coming. It wasn't about them anymore. It wasn't even about what they did to me. It was about what we had done with the story. We didn't just react. We rebuilt. We didn't just speak up. We rewrote what safety and trust could look like in tech. A junior dev tapped me on the shoulder that afternoon and said, almost casually, "You know, if you hadn't been locked out that night, this place wouldn't even exist." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was true. The worst night of my career had become the first spark of something that mattered more than I ever imagined. We kept growing, not explosively, but steadily. The kind of growth that comes when people actually believe in what you're building. Universities asked us to guest lecture. Policy groups invited us to consult. And best of all, people who had once stayed silent were now reaching out to say, "Thank you. You gave me a roadmap." I didn't set out to become a symbol. I set out to be heard. But if being heard meant building a platform where others could speak freely too, then maybe everything I lost wasn't really a loss at all. That red badge that blinked me out of existence had unknowingly blinked something else into motion. Something that couldn't be shut down with a deactivated login or a sealed HR letter. Something that didn't end with me. It began with me, sure, but it belonged to everyone who ever stayed late to fix what others ignored, who asked questions no one wanted to hear, who stood up and got pushed out. This story was never just mine. It was ours now, and it was only getting louder. The story of Bella isn't just about betrayal or corporate failure. It's a reminder that silence can be weaponized, but so can truth. Being fired, ignored, or erased doesn't define your worth. What you choose to build from it does. Bella turned a locked door into a new path, one paved with transparency, integrity, and courage. The lesson here is clear. Your voice has value, even when it shakes. Speaking up may cost you comfort, but staying silent could cost others their safety. In a world where speed often outruns ethics, we need more people willing to slow down, question, and rebuild better. This isn't just a story of one woman's resilience. It's a call to anyone who's ever been made to feel small for doing the right thing. You are not alone. What feels like an ending may just be the moment your real story begins. So, if you're standing at the edge of fear, wondering if telling the truth is worth it, remember Bella. Remember that even the smallest act of courage can echo farther than you think. Keep going. Speak up. Build something better, because the future listens to those who refuse to be silent.